either case. In a stroke, the quicker and the earlier you bring the person to the hospital, potentially within hours, within few hours, 3, 4 hours, a lot of the functions can be restored. Welcome to Dayspring Life and Health channel. Today we're going to talk about the differences between TIA, which is transient ischemic attack, and stroke. We have talked about what is TIA and we've talked at length about stroke. So what are the typical differences between transient ischemic attacks, which is TIAs or mini strokes, and a full-blown stroke? Don't forget to subscribe to this channel, hit on the like button, and send your comments and questions on the comment section. We're going to talk about four differences between a stroke and a TIA. Well, before we start with the difference, let's define these words. The words are ischemia and also infarction. So ischemia and infarction. Those two words separate stroke and a TIA. So what is ischemia? Ischemia literally means that oxygenated blood or blood flow to a particular cell or cell group or tissue is restricted. So whenever blood is stopped or is blocked from flowing to an area of the body, the cells there undergo ischemia because they don't have the nutrients, and most importantly, they don't have oxygen. Oxygen is for life. And if ischemia continues and is not resolved over a long period, the cells that are denied blood supply would eventually die. So that brings us to the other word, which is infarction. Infarction is the cell actually dying. So the cell can be disrupted, can be distressed because temporarily they are not receiving the blood which carries oxygen and nutrients. Ischemia happening. But if it's prolonged, then the cells may eventually die. When the cells die, we call it infarction. So those two big words define and distinguish stroke and the TIA. So in the TIA, the brain cells have ischemia. Temporarily, blood supply to the brain is restricted, and so the cells become distressed. If we were using a diagram, we could paint those cells blue because they don't have blood supply to them. So that is what happens in ischemia. The cells in the brain don't have the blood supply they need to function, but because it resolves, it goes away after some time when the blood supply comes back to normal. But in a stroke, the cells in the brain, in the part of the brain that is affected, the cells actually die. Whether it was due to initial blood supply that was blocked, or whether it was due to a clot there that restricted blood supply to the cells there, or whatever it is. So basically, infarction means cells are dead. So in stroke, there are cell death in the brain. In a TIA or a mini stroke or transient ischemic attack, there is ischemia of the brain cells. So those are the classic differences between the two. When we come to symptoms, differences in symptoms, as you can tell, in TIA or in a mini stroke or in a transient ischemic attack, the functions of the cells may be restored back as soon as blood supply to the regions where initial blood supply was not going. As soon as blood supply is restored, the cells may regain the ability to function normally. That is why if somebody has a TIA, they may have a left side weakness over a few minutes, maybe 10, 15 minutes, or maybe 5 minutes, and then eventually it is restored. That is because blood supply has been restored and the person has now regained function in those cells in the brain. However, in a stroke, the blood cells, even if it is restored, the cells would have died already, so they lose their function almost completely unless new cells are built up, or maybe due to other cells which are trained using physical therapy and stuff to regain those functions. The cells which are initially dead will remain dead. Also, in a stroke patient, the functions that are destroyed. So if the cells that control your ability to move are dead, then obviously the left side of the body or the right side of the body where those cells controlled would not work for that period. So in that case, the functions that are lost almost more permanently. Even if it's restored, it would take forever. It would take a long time, for them to be restored. And then also in the TIA, there is a visible ischemia in the brain. So when you have an MRI of a patient with a TIA, you see ischemia. The cells are not dead, but when you have an MRI of a patient with a stroke, you can tell infarction. So the cells in the brain can be seen on an MRI as dying or dead in a stroke patient as against somebody with a TIA. So when you have any symptoms of a TIA, you have to go and get checked, because if they check and they see that the cells in the brain are actually dead, they won't wait. They will give you a clot buster and some other medications that can potentially save other cells from dying. So you don't wait and say that, let me wait, maybe it will restore, maybe I'll be restored. You never know if it's really a full-blown stroke on board or a TIA which resolves. Even if it resolves, you still need to be treated. The fourth difference is that a stroke can also be caused by an aneurysm or bleeding in the brain, but a TIA usually is caused by ischemia. It's caused by a blockage of blood flow to an area of the brain rather than an aneurysm. So in a stroke, it could have happened from, even though it is not as often, it's still possible for a stroke to happen due to an aneurysm, usually caused by an uncontrolled blood pressure, and so, or a leaking in the blood vessels in the brain, which leads to bleeding in the brain. So a stroke can be caused that way, but a TIA is just a temporal restriction or temporal halting of the blood flow to regions of the brain, leading to symptoms that we know can usually be resolved. Now, those four things are your major differences between a mini stroke and a TIA. The unique thing about them is if you can get yourself checked in a hospital, or if you help somebody who is having any stroke symptoms and bring them to the hospital as soon as possible, that is what you can do to save them. Because even in a mini stroke or a TIA, there is no guarantee that the cells will not progress to dying and eventually leading to a more permanent damage. So then going to the hospital is basically saving their lives. In either case, in a stroke, the quicker and the earlier you bring the person to the hospital, potentially within hours, within few hours, 3, 4 hours, a lot of the functions can be restored. So that is it for the differences between stroke and TIA or transient ischemic attacks. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and look down and click on the subscribe button so that you will see and be alerted of any new videos that we show. Beloved, I wish above all things that you prosper and be in health, even as your soul prospers.